98 square inch racket segment is the most competitive racket segment in tennis. There are honestly a ton of amazing options, but it can be really hard to orient yourself in the racket jungle. Right off the bat, I'll just tell you, my personal favorite 98 is the Slinko Whiteout 18x20, and that's why it's my racket of choice. But the problem is, just because it's my favorite does not mean it will be right for you. Not to mention, it's like almost impossible to get outside the US right now. So in today's video, we're going to be ranking some of the most popular 98 square inch rackets you can buy today on sliding scales by a variety of criteria to help you find your next racket. Note that I haven't tried every single 98 square inch racket on the market. That would be almost impossible. So if your favorite Prince or Vocal isn't on this list, it's just because I haven't tried it yet, not because I'm personally trying to throw shade. Also, I'm only really going to talk about the rackets that I've had multiple hours of hitting experience with. For example, I really do like the Dunlop CX200, but I only had the chance to hit with it for maybe 20 minutes. This means we're only going to be talking about 11 rackets plus their string pattern options, so I think those are going to be the most mainstream and important 98 square inch rackets for the average player. Note that some of these rackets are also offered in a variety of weight options, but for this test we're going to be going with whatever option is closest to 305 grams static weight, because that seems to be by far the most popular. Further, there are a couple options available in different lengths, so for this video we're just going to be sticking to the standard length, 27 inches. Also, this video, much like every other tennis racket review video, can never be fully objective, unbiased, or empirical. Every day that we step on court is a new day. Weather conditions will affect your strings and how the ball bounces. Our hitting partners are going to be playing a little bit differently from day to day, and quality control means that two rackets don't always leave the factory with the same specs. Things like weight, bounce, and stiffness can actually vary greatly depending on the racket. So if you disagree with something that I said, you're wrong. Just kidding. Please leave a comment telling us about your experience so that people watching this video have more data points to chew on rather than just the opinion of me. So first, I think we should start with feel, because you can really narrow down your selection by deciding what kind of feel you want. Here, we're going to break up feel into two categories. The first is going to be the level of ball feedback that you get, and the second is going to be the length of the dwell time, or the level of ball pocketing offered by the string bed. Ball feedback is typically determined by how much dampening tech is utilized in the racket. This feedback is vibration, which can be felt both in the hand but also heard as sound. More dampening tech usually means a more muted feel. Some examples of dampening tech could be like Wilson's Countervail, Yonex VDM or vibration dampening mesh, and Bablat's Cortex. Some may perceive that more muted feel as a more solid feel, while others may perceive it as a more disconnected experience. Dwell time refers to how long that ball is held on the string bed during your shot. Typically, softer rackets with more open string patterns, heavier weights, and higher swing weights will have longer dwell times. Usually, longer dwell times are associated with good ball pocketing or a more old school feel, but they usually have lower pitched hitting sounds, which can also feel more solid. Shorter dwell times often feel more modern and are sometimes referred to as point and shoot by the legendary Chris Edwards. And you know what else is legendary? Direct tennis! If you don't already know what they are, you should, and you're gonna have to listen to the rest of this ad, or else. Basically, if you need your racket strung and you don't know where to go, or you've gone somewhere and you haven't had a good experience, I've actually recently seen a surprisingly amount of so-called reputable big shops give just the world's worst string jobs, like inexcusable knots, single hitch knots that have slipped out. If you don't like that, you can sign up for Direct Tennis. It's an app where you'll be able to connect to a local stringer near you. Usually these local stringers have a way more ownership over their work, and they're going to try really hard to make sure you're getting a good, reliable string job, because they know how embarrassing it is to give someone a racket where a knot slips out. And usually they own their own business, so they have pride in what they do, and a lot of the time they're really knowledgeable. That was pretty salty little ad roll of me. Anyway, let's move on to stability. When it comes to stability, that racket can get pushed around in two very different ways. You've probably felt your racket twist in your hand during off-center shots, and the better that racket is in resisting twisting, the greater torsional stability it has. Typically, rackets with stiffer layups, thicker beams, more weight towards the 3 and line and clock locations, they are going to feel more torsionally stable. The next kind of stability is what I'm going to call lateral stability, but it's most felt on like volleys and returns. If you ever felt your racket just get like knocked back like that from a hard shot, usually because you had contact point outside the sweet spot or hit it late, mostly towards the tip of the frame. Rackets with high recoil weights, swing weights, static weights, and stiffnesses usually have better lateral stability, so they can really like push through that ball a little more instead of just getting flown back. That said, this might not be super important to you, as I find its relevance is higher when you're dealing with higher ball speeds, and it's not quite as important for lower level intermediates and beginners. All right, so power. Often, I honestly struggle with the way that people define power. There's so much to power. I think it's a little bit more nuanced than a lot of people give it credit for. Often, power is defined as some combination of depth, ball speed, and the general heaviness of the ball, but it can also be thought of how much help that racket's going to give you. And to me, this is a little bit too vague, so I want to split power up and talk about it in two different ways. The first is attacking power. This is when you're in control of the point and you're trying to really beat down your opponent with good pace and court penetration. To me, high swing weight is key when it comes to attacking power, but stiffer rackets with thicker beams will also transfer energy more efficiently, allowing you to hit harder, faster shots that will hurt your opponent with ball speed and spin. The other way I want to talk about power is through forgiveness, and this is more about how that racket helps you hit an effective shot when you're kind of out of position. I often refer to this as forgiveness outside the sweet spot. Rackets that are more forgiving are often more stable and have less of a playability drop-off outside the sweet spot, and sometimes you just call this as having a large sweet spot. This usually means there's more hitting weight or weight placed around the perimeter of the hoop, but typically I find rackets with more open string patterns, especially towards the edges of the string bed, and thicker beams also will definitely help increase general forgiveness. So on to control. When I judge control, I think about it in two different ways. And generally, I think it's more about how the string bed performs. And not only for me, who has to make this list, but nicely for you, the consumer who enjoys choice, some of these rackets have multiple string patterns to choose from. And for the previous categories, I actually don't think the string pattern makes a sufficiently significant difference in rankings to bother cluttering up that list. But for control, string pattern is absolutely critical. The problem is I don't want to make all these icons like too tiny, so we're going to have my preferred string pattern in a given racket as big, and the one I don't like as much as small, because I'm just that petty. Anyway, typically lower launch angles are associated with better control because it's harder to access depth and miss long. You'll often have to swing harder or more vertically to get the same kind of net clearance and depth that you might find with a higher launch angle racket. Usually rackets with less open or more closed string spacing and lower stiffnesses will have lower launch angles. Note that I said less open string spacing, not open patterns, as some 1619s will be tighter than some 1820s. You can just drill the strings wherever you want. No, they're not all drilled the same, so there is some variation there. When it comes to directional control, usually tighter string spacing is better. However, it's also about matching the pattern to the playability drop-off. For example, the 16x19 string pattern in the E-zone is very tight in the middle and a little bit more open towards the edges to account for less forgiveness outside the sweet spot compared to, say, a pure Aero 98 that has very high forgiveness off center and more even spacing throughout the racket head. I also find that rackets with a more consistent flex and better stability have better directional control. Usually that means a medium to high flex. Some rackets like the Wilson Clash or the Wilson Shift will flex a little differently depending on what kind of shot you hit. I find that this leads to a more inconsistent response, thus actually poorer directional control. Spin. So there are two types of spin that players hit with, but for some reason these spin rackets seem to be geared exclusively for topspin. With both types of spin, I think racket head speed and maneuverability is absolutely key. However, I think that they draw on different playing attributes for the rest of their success. I find that the best topspin rackets often have more power, whereas the best slice rackets need strong directional control. I also personally find that the effective string pattern in the same frame, so like a 16-19 strike versus an 18-20 strike, has surprisingly insignificant impact on that string production, especially for topspin. But I will include the additional string patterns mainly because I'm scared of the mean comments you guys will leave if I don't. I also think it's very important to say that you can hit both flat and topspin with all of these rackets. No racket in this category is bad for flat shots or bad for spin shots. They have to be good for both because the 98 square inch category is designed to be versatile to perform perfectly well in almost every situation. So the differences here are going to be more slight than we've seen in other categories. Okay, so this one is simple. It's basically just maneuverability, but don't let that simplicity fool you. Maneuverability is critical for generating those fast swing speeds, which will help you access better power and better spin. But it can also be helpful for getting into position when it comes to returning serves or hitting volleys. All right, so last up is my overall recommendations. But before we get to that point, if you are gonna buy one of these rackets or you want to do some shopping around, I'm really absolutely excited to announce we're now partnered with Tennis Warehouse. That's huge. I'm super excited about this. I've been working my ass off, but thank you to the viewer, because this would not be possible without your support, you roasting me when I make a shit video, and you supporting me when you like a video, because I know what you like now, and it turns out Tennis Warehouse likes it too. So if you're going to make an order from Tennis Warehouse Europe, or Tennis only, click the link below, and then we'll get a little bit of chunk of the change from the purchase you buy, which is really, I think, really going to help TennCom get to that next level in production quality. You may think, oh, you have such good production quality compared to a lot of the other channels. Well, it's going to get better if you spend enough money with Tennis Warehouse, and then that money goes to me, because I'll be able to get like a second camera, multiple angles on court shots and stuff. It's going to be epic. I have some crazy ideas planned. Anyway, so overall recommendations, here we are. So for the overall recommendations, these are the ones that I find myself recommending the most during my racket consultations through my website, but also in the comments, because I do try to reply to any comment or DM you send me on Instagram. I think that this is the closest I'll ever get to some sort of semi-objective overall best list. However, it is still incredibly subjective, and I would expect almost everyone out there to disagree with at least some portion of it. And then finally, we have my personal list, and these are the rackets that I'd choose for myself in order of rackets I'd most want to use as my racket of choice to rackets I'd least want to use as my racket of choice. Thanks so much for watching. I'm so glad you're here, and we'll see ya in the next one.